Wait, Theodore said, descending the marble stairs with an elegance that made heads turn. He didn't run. Theodore Langford never ran, but he walked like the storm was beneath his feet and she was the eye. Miss, the guard muttered, blocking her path gently. I'm not here to steal your caviar, she snapped, hugging a rolled-up poster tube under her arm. You're not on the guest list, he said firmly. I thought this was a fundraiser, she replied. For the children's hospital. It is, the guard began. It forgot, Theodore interrupted smoothly. The woman blinked, stepping back as she noticed him. Tall, controlled, powerful, his expression unreadable, save for the flicker of intrigue in his eyes. You seem lost, he said, offering a clean handkerchief from his breast pocket. She hesitated, then took it. I thought this was an open auction for charity, she muttered, her voice husky with rain and pride. But apparently it's just a couture parade. He glanced at the elite crowd, pearls, tuxedos, laughter echoing like glass. It is a charity event, he said quietly. It just forgot its purpose. Her eyes softened, storm gray and unblinking. And you? I never forget anything. She exhaled sharply, then tucked her dripping hair behind her ear. I didn't mean to crash. I just wanted to donate a piece. He raised an eyebrow. You're an artist. Charity artist, she corrected. Mostly paints for causes that no one funds. He glanced at the tube in her hand. May I? Her grip tightened. He waited. She finally offered it. Theodore unrolled it slowly on a velvet-covered table, revealing a haunting, vivid canvas, a faceless child with wings made of medical tubing and hospital bands. The brushwork was raw, messy, impassioned. It was not commercial. It was not pretty. It was real. Would you like it appraised? He asked. No, she said. I want it hung. He looked up. You don't even know who I am. She shrugged. Doesn't matter. Do you know who I am? Theodore's lips curved. Not yet. He turned to the guard. She's with me. The guard hesitated, then nodded. Melanie brushed past him, proud but breathless. Don't think this means you're forgiven for all this champagne-glazed hypocrisy. I would never dare assume forgiveness, he said, falling into step beside her. But I do believe in curiosity. They walked through the corridor, his stride cool and measured, hers soft and barefoot on the polished floor. You're not wearing shoes, he remarked. I ran out of the taxi. Didn't want the driver to charge extra for waiting. He smirked. And yet, you brought your portfolio. Art doesn't wait, she said. Neither spoke for a beat. Then he asked, What's your name? Melanie, she replied. Melanie Hart. She expected him to laugh, to say it sounded like a soap opera character. Instead, he nodded. The name suits the chaos. She frowned. I'm not chaos. No, he replied, pausing near a sculpture. You're the part after it. The part that decides whether to rebuild or run. Melanie didn't know what to say to that. So she said nothing. At the end of the corridor, her painting had already been quietly placed on an easel by the gallery staff. A subtle order from Theodore. She stared at it, at the piece that had nearly been thrown away. You know they'll ignore it, she said. Yes, he agreed. But you'll make them look? I will, he promised. She turned to him. Why? Because you walked into my world like it wasn't sacred, he said. And somehow, you made it honest. A long silence stretched between them. Then she whispered, You're dangerous. And you're late for a cause that matters. He extended his hand again, not a handkerchief this time, but his palm, open and waiting. She didn't take it. Instead, she asked, Are you trying to seduce me, Mr. Theodore Langford? She blinked. As in that Langford. He smiled faintly. Still think I'm forgettable? She chuckled. No, just mistaken for a decent human being. His grin widened. That's the most accurate insult I've received all evening. They stood under the skylight. The rain above had quieted to a gentle patter. She turned to leave. Where are you going? He asked. Home, she said. I didn't come here to flirt with power. You didn't flirt, he said. You challenged it. Her steps slowed. She looked back, eyes narrowed. Good night, Mr. Langford. He nodded, watching her disappear down the corridor. And for the first time in years, the billionaire didn't feel in control. He felt undone. Theodore Langford rarely broke routine, but that week He visited her studio 3 times. Not with warning, not with champagne, just himself. Standing in the alley behind the converted warehouse she called her safe mess, waiting until the smell of turpentine leaked into the street, and her laugh echoed through cracked windows. The 3rd time she opened the door before he could knock. "You've been stalking me," she said plainly, wiping her hands on a paint-stained apron. "You left your umbrella at the gala," he replied, holding out a black-folded one. "I never brought one." He smiled. "Then I must be here for something else." Her studio smelled like coffee, linseed oil, and rain. Canvases leaned against every wall, unframed, raw, emotional. None of them had price tags. None had been signed. She painted because she had to, not because she wanted to impress galleries. She moved like someone who forgot to doubt herself. Hair pulled up in a chaotic bun, bare feet on concrete, fingers stained with streaks of cobalt and ochre. He'd seen models stripped to lace, billionaires stripped to silence, but never had a woman looked more naked than Melanie in her own space, with no armor but honesty. "Are you going to just stand there?" she asked, turning her back to him as she approached a half-finished canvas. "Yes," he said, voice low. "I'm not one of your mistresses, Langford. I didn't assume you were. Then what do you want?" "To understand what compels you." She paused. "Most men try to impress me with yachts or watches. You're offering curiosity? I can afford both. But neither got my heart racing like the way you stared down security in soaking red linen." She smirked, dipping her brush into green. "Don't romanticize it. I was embarrassed and furious. And yet you didn't back down." She painted another stroke in silence, then asked, "Are you really a CEO?" "Yes." "Of what?" "Langford Holdings, real estate, investments, media. And what does that mean?" "It means I own most of what you complain about in your paintings." She turned and laughed, genuinely. "The enemy has entered the temple," she teased. "More like the temple entered the enemy's mind." He wandered to a large canvas on the far side of the room. A girl with wings too heavy for her frame, bruised knees, her eyes closed as though flight was a memory, not a hope. "What's this one called?" he asked. "I don't name them." "Why?" "Because if someone needs a title to feel something, they're not ready." He nodded slowly. She watched him from the corner of her eye. "I'm not used to men watching me without asking for anything. I'm not used to women letting me watch without performing." Melanie's mouth curled slightly. "You're dangerous, Mr. Langford. You've said that before." "I meant it." The silence turned thick. She stepped toward him. "Close, very close. I can smell your cologne," she whispered. "And I can smell the turpentine on your skin. You like it?" "I'm considering bottling it." Her smile faded. "This isn't a seduction, Theodore." "No," he murmured, his fingers brushing a loose curl from her forehead. "It's an interruption." Their eyes met. Neither moved, but the energy crackled between them like summer heat before a thunderstorm. She turned away first. "I have work to finish." He nodded, stepping back. "Thank you for letting me in." "I didn't," she said, over her shoulder. "You walked through the door like you owned the air." He paused at the threshold. "Melanie." She looked up. "I don't want to fix you. I want to understand the parts no one stays long enough to see." Her breath caught. He didn't wait for a reply. He left. That night, Melanie couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his words. Not what he said, but how he said them. Without a script, without seduction, like he meant it, like he saw her. She painted until dawn. 3 days later, she found a box outside her studio door. No label, no card. Inside, brushes, new ones, expensive ones, and beneath them, a handwritten note. Every artist deserves tools that won't abandon them mid-stroke. T. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply opened the windows, let the light pour in, and whispered to the wind. Maybe. Theodore didn't call. He didn't send another note. No flowers. No dramatic grand gesture. That would have ruined it. Instead, he let the silence stretch, let curiosity ferment. And Melanie, she kept painting, but each brushstroke was heavier, slower, like she was waiting for something to interrupt her rhythm again. It came 2 weeks later, in the form of a handwritten invitation, slipped under her door. No logo, no RSVP instructions, just a folded piece of thick, off-white paper sealed with crimson wax. She opened it. Tonight. The top floor. No pearls, no heels, just you. T. Melanie stood outside the Langford London Tower, questioning every decision that led her here. No one stopped her this time. The elevator required no keycard. It lit up the penthouse floor as soon as she stepped in. Smooth ascent. No music. Just the hum of anticipation. When the doors opened, the skyline greeted her first, floor to ceiling. Windows wrapping around a minimalist space bathed in soft amber light. No staff. No champagne towers. No guests. Just Theodore. In a black shirt, sleeves rolled, barefoot. Barefoot. She blinked. I assumed you'd appreciate a dress code without pretense, he said, approaching. Her with that calm arrogance only born from wealth and restraint. You assumed correctly, she replied, stepping inside. But if this is your idea of seduction, it's missing strawberries. I wasn't seducing you. Then what are you doing? Letting you decide. She wandered past the leather sofa and into the kitchen. Spotless, cold, stainless steel. Everything about the room screamed control. Until she noticed it. A canvas, blank, set on an easel, with her name taped to the corner. She turned. Is this a trick? No, he said. It's a request. For what? For you to mark this space with something that doesn't belong to money. Her breath caught. You want me to paint here? I want this space to have your fingerprints before it has your body. They stood quietly, eyes locked. The tension was unbearable, but unspoken. She walked to the canvas, touched the edge. You're not the man I thought you were. I never was. No, you were worse. He laughed softly. I'll take that as progress. She looked out at the skyline. You live so high above everyone else. I have to, he said. It's how I learned to breathe. She turned to him slowly. You don't look like you're breathing right now. I'm not. And with that, he moved. Not rushed, not forceful, just deliberate. One step at a time until he was in front of her. She didn't flinch. He reached up and undid the knot of her scarf, exposing her throat, the base of her neck, the faintest hint of a freckle just above her collarbone. You always study people like you're memorizing them, she whispered. Because if I blink, I might forget what truth looks like. Then came the kiss. Slow, curved, intimate. His hands didn't touch her body at first, only her face. One thumb grazing her cheek, the other behind her ear. His mouth met hers with quiet confidence, but no greed. When she kissed back, it was with intention. They weren't lovers yet, but they were already something more dangerous. Two people no longer pretending. They made it to the sofa. It wasn't rushed. There were no ripped clothes, no broken buttons, no frantic breathlessness. Instead, there were whispers, pauses, soft gasps. She climbed into his lap, her fingers threading into his hair as he pulled the tie from hers. Curls fell against his cheek. You're trembling, he murmured. I haven't done this in a while, she admitted. Not like this. Like what? Like I might care about it afterward. His arms wrapped around her waist, anchoring her. Then don't be careful. Be honest. Their clothes slipped away gradually. His shirt first, then hers. When he traced the lines of her back with his palms, she shivered, not because she was cold, but because she hadn't been touched like a woman in years. Not like a prize, not like a performance, but like skin, like story, like sin and salvation blended. She moved slowly at first, letting her body decide. When she finally lowered herself onto him, her gasp wasn't one of pain or surprise, but of recognition, as if something lost had been found again. They didn't speak for a long time. Only the sounds of skin and breath and surrender filled the room. She rode him like she was reclaiming her own rhythm. He let her. His hands never forced, never demanded, only held, lifted, listened. Afterward, she lay against his chest, both of them still catching their breath. He traced circles on her shoulder. She whispered, Is this your world now? He smiled against her hair. Only if you keep drawing on it. She looked up at him. I don't belong in penthouses, Theodore. You don't belong anywhere, he said gently. You're supposed to change everywhere you go. She closed her eyes. And this time, when she slept, she didn't dream of being alone. The morning after, Melanie didn't expect anything. She didn't expect a call, or a message, or even a quiet knock on her door. But she did expect the ache, the one that always arrived when she gave too much of herself and expected nothing in return. So when her studio buzzer rang just past noon, she ignored it. It rang again, then again. She sighed, brushing her hair into a loose ponytail and wrapping herself in her paint-splattered robe. When she opened the door, no one was there. Just a box, no label, no branding. She brought it inside and opened the lid. Inside, roses, dozens of them, but not the kind she expected. Not the usual cream or blush or deep red. These were wild, painted in hues she hadn't seen in years. Vibrant yellows, cobalt blues, crimsons that bled into violet edges. They weren't natural. They were dyed, crafted. Each bloom looked like it had stolen color from a brush, and tucked among them was a note. You once told me colors have meaning, so here's hope, truth, and desire, delivered in pigment. T. Melanie stared at the flowers for a long time. They didn't make her smile. They made her feel. That was worse. She wanted to be angry at him, for being too much, for being unexpected, for making her think of hands on skin and breath on breath and all the things that made her tremble in the dark. But the truth was, he wasn't trying to impress her. He was trying to understand her. That was new and terrifying. Later that evening he texted, just one word, dinner? She didn't reply, not out of spite, but because she wasn't sure if saying yes meant stepping back into something she'd already begun to fall inside. The next morning, she opened her front door and froze. There was another box. This time, not flowers. Paint. Tubes of professional-grade oil colors, some so rare she'd only seen them once in a Parisian boutique. And again, a note. I won't call, I won't press. But if you decide to create today, I'd like to believe I helped. T. Her chest tightened. This wasn't a CEO flexing his wallet. This was a man offering her oxygen in the only language she'd ever trusted, color. That night, she painted with new brushes, new colors, and old memories. She painted what she feared, intimacy. A man's hands over a woman's chest, not to own, but to understand. A mouth near her hip, not in dominance, but in worship. She painted them faceless, but she knew who they were. When the last stroke dried, she looked at the clock. 2:37 a.m. She grabbed her phone, typed, tomorrow, 8 p.m. Don't wear black, and hit send. Theodore didn't reply, but at 7:59 the next night, he stood outside her studio wearing a dove gray button-down and no jacket. She opened the door, not saying a word. He didn't kiss her, didn't reach for her waist. He handed her a small paper bag. She blinked. What's this? He shrugged. I made dinner. You. I watched a video. She arched a brow. Okay, he admitted. I paid someone to show me how to cook it and then made it myself. She smirked. That's cheating. That's delegation, he said. Inside the bag, 2 neatly wrapped foil trays. Inside the trays, grilled vegetables, salmon, and a lemon risotto that smelled like effort. They ate sitting on the floor between canvases. No candles. No playlist. Just 2 humans, chewing and stealing glances. You're not what I thought you'd be, she said eventually. I hope not. I thought you'd be controlling. I am. She looked up sharply. He smiled. But not with you. Never with you. She swallowed. You don't even know me. I know you paint pain better than anyone I've ever seen. She paused. And what do you want from that? To help you paint something else. Eventually, her fork dropped. Not loudly, but enough to make the air feel heavier. I don't want to be your project, she said quietly. You're not, he replied. You're the reason I'm questioning everything I thought mattered. She turned to him, eyes fierce. That's not fair. I know. I don't have a penthouse. I don't care. I don't have legacy. You are legacy, he said. The kind that changes people. Melanie stared at him for a long time, then whispered, I'm scared. So am I. They didn't kiss that night, but when he left he looked back once, just once, as if making sure she was still watching. She was, and she didn't blink. There was no plan, no curated moment, no champagne bottle uncorked or silk sheets turned down. It happened because neither of them wanted to go home that night. They'd spent the afternoon walking along the south bank, not speaking much, just observing. Theodore didn't wear a watch. Melanie didn't check her phone. They shared a paper cone of hot chips from a street cart. He told her about his mother, how she never smiled with her eyes. She told him about her brother, how he used to sleep under her bed just to hear her heartbeat. By sunset, they ended up in her studio again, surrounded by canvases and half-finished thoughts. She peeled off her jacket. He removed his cufflinks, and silence stretched between them like a question neither knew how to answer. "You ever been scared of your own body?" she asked suddenly. Theodore looked at her. "Every time I realize it wants something I can't control." She nodded, then walked to him, kissed him softly. No performance, no prelude. Just lips seeking confirmation. He responded the way a man does when he's not trying to dominate, but remember, like he already knew her taste, her rhythm, her tremble. This time, there were no slow undressings. She tugged his shirt over his head with impatient fingers. He slid her top away, exposing skin like unveiling a masterpiece. No compliments, no commentary, just breath. And hands. They made love on the hardwood floor, between paint tubes and sketchbooks. Underneath the ceiling she once patched herself with duct tape and hope. Melanie straddled him, her thighs framing his hips as she rocked slowly, deliberately. He let her lead. His hands found her waist, grounding her as she moved like memory and desire blended. When she leaned down to kiss his neck, he whispered, "Don't stop." She whispered back, "I wasn't planning to." She came first, silently, eyes closed, lips parted, as if her body released years of doubt in one clean exhale. He followed seconds later, fingers digging into her back like he didn't want her to leave the moment. But she didn't. She stayed, chest to chest, breath to breath. After, they lay side by side, a blanket of one of her old sweaters half thrown over them. The moon spilled through the high window, painting silver lines across his bare shoulder. Melanie turned her head. "I don't know what this is." Theodore didn't speak right away. Then, "It's not casual." She blinked. "You're a CEO. Your world thrives on the casual. Not when it comes to you." She propped herself up on one elbow. "Why me?" He looked her squarely in the eyes. "Because you don't let people escape their truth. Not even yourself." Her lips parted, ready to speak, maybe to argue. But instead, she pressed her forehead against his and breathed him in. Later, when he reached for his phone to check the time, she stopped him. "Don't. Just making sure my driver hasn't left. You'll wake the world up," she whispered. "So, I like this version of you, the one who doesn't have clocks." He placed the phone face down and stayed. She fell asleep curled into his side, his hand resting on the curve of her hip like it belonged there. He didn't close his eyes for a long time. He just listened to her breathe and thought, so this is what real feels like. Theodore didn't ask her with a ring. He asked her with a brush, a gold-handled, sable-bristle No. 8 filbert. He laid it on her studio table one morning, wrapped in linen, beside a small note. "Let's paint the rest of our lives together. Will you marry me?" Melanie stared at it for minutes, then hours. No diamond, no kneeling, just a brush. The exact kind she'd once told him she couldn't afford when she was 19 and sleeping on a futon. It was more intimate than jewelry, more permanent than words. That evening, she walked into his penthouse without knocking, barefoot and paint-smudged. "I said yes," she whispered. He didn't speak. He just kissed her, like he'd been holding his breath since the moment he sent the brush. They didn't tell anyone. No headlines, no social media hints, no press releases from Langford Holdings. They kept it small, sacred, a wind-swept chapel on the cliffs of Dover, overlooking the sea that thundered beneath them like applause. Only two witnesses, the old chapel caretaker and the breeze that wouldn't stop tangling her veil. Melanie painted her gown, not with glitter, not with sparkle, but with cobalt indigo and warm streaks of rose, colors that meant something to her. It wasn't polished. It wasn't white. It was her. Theodore wore no tie, just a cream shirt under a navy suit, unbuttoned at the collar and bare feet in the grass. "Shoes feel like apologies," he said, when she looked down at them. "And I'm not sorry," he added, eyes steady on hers. They didn't read vows. They whispered promises into each other's palms. She said, "I won't always be easy to love." He replied, "Then I'll love you harder when it's hardest." She said, "I'm afraid of being left." He answered, Then I'll build you a home inside my arms." The caretaker sniffled in the background. The wind carried their words away, but not before they sank deep into skin. When they kissed, it wasn't cinematic. It wasn't slow motion or orchestrated. It was real, messy, full of salt and wind and the soft noise Melanie made when her hand slid beneath his coat. He wrapped both arms around her and held her so tight she laughed into his mouth. "Are you crushing me, Mr. Langford?" "I'm claiming you," he murmured. "And if I resist, I'll fall harder." That night, they didn't check into a hotel. They drove to a quiet cottage just off the coast, one Melanie used to rent when she needed to disappear from the noise. Theodore carried her across the threshold, more out of instinct than tradition. Inside, it smelled of lavender and old wood. She lit candles. He opened a window, and they undressed each other slowly, not as strangers exploring, but as lovers becoming something new. He kissed the painted parts of her dress as she peeled it off, trailing, his lips across indigo brushstrokes until they dissolved into skin. She whispered, "Promise me you'll never wear a tie again." "I promise. Promise you won't stop kissing my scars. I'll find new ones. Promise you'll never let me go." "I can't," he said softly. "You're part of me now." Their first night as husband and wife didn't end in sleep. It ended in stillness, breathless, tangled, quiet stillness. Melanie lay across his chest, listening to the soft beat beneath his ribs. "You don't feel like a billionaire," she murmured. "Good. You feel like a heartbeat I've always heard from far away." He didn't reply. He just pulled her closer and kissed the top of her head. Melanie hadn't planned for motherhood, not because she didn't want it, but because she never saw a world calm enough to bring life into. But it happened, quietly, in the most unceremonious way. A missed cycle, then two, then a test that turned positive, before she even set it down. She sat on the bathroom floor of their Devonshire home, legs folded beneath her like she was praying. Except her prayers were questions, and the only answer was the two lines staring back at her. When she told Theodore, her voice barely left her lips. "I'm pregnant." He froze, not with shock, but with calculation. His eyes darted, first to her stomach, then to her face, then somewhere far away. He reached for her, placed a kiss on her forehead and said, "That's incredible," then stood. "Shanghai's on the line in 5, he added, already tapping his earpiece. Melanie sat on the bed as he disappeared into his office, heartbeat ricocheting inside her ribs like a trapped bird. She'd imagined the moment differently. More touch, more breath, more us. Instead, it felt like a business update. She tried to be understanding, tried to remind herself that his world didn't function on instinct. It operated on data, reports, efficiency. He didn't forget the pregnancy. He just tried to manage it. Like he managed everything. Nursery construction began the next day. Architects brought in from Denmark Natural. Light simulated by smart glass panels. Custom mattresses flown in from Italy. He hired a nutritionist, a prenatal yoga instructor, a security detail. Everything. Except himself. One night, as Melanie stood naked in front of the mirror, fingers tracing the slight curve of her belly, she whispered to it, "He means well." The baby didn't answer, but it kicked, just once. Small, brave, like it wanted her to keep hoping. She turned, saw the unopened box of supplements on the nightstand, and sighed. She wanted less medicine, more midnight spooning, less perfection, more presence. She tried to explain it to him. "I don't want chefs and apps," she said as he walked into their bedroom one evening, still mid-call. "I want you. I want you to feel the flutter when I lie on your chest. I want you to sing to me even if you're off-key. I want you to hold my belly and remember, this is our child, not a quarterly deliverable." He looked at her like she'd spoken in an ancient dialect, then smiled politely. "Mel, you're just emotional. It's the hormones. Don't be dramatic." That word, dramatic. She didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She just nodded, and didn't say another word that night. But as he slept beside her, she sat by the window and painted in silence. Blue over gray, curve over curve, indigo over fingertips that trembled. The next morning she told the baby, "You deserve to be seen." Then she kissed her belly and went downstairs to another meeting of florists she hadn't asked for. The nursery was perfect. Climate controlled, air purified, soft gray walls, hand painted with woodland creatures. The crib? custom-built from reclaimed French oak. The mobile, designed by an award-winning sculptor in Denmark. The rugs, curtains, lighting, every detail reviewed, signed, and executed to match Theodore's exacting standards. But when Melanie stood in the doorway, barefoot, belly round, eyes tired, she felt nothing. No warmth, no soul, just silence padded in luxury. She spent hours alone in the room, hoping for connection. She'd sit on the edge of the velvet rocker, pressing her palms against her belly whenever the baby moved. She spoke to it softly. "You won't sleep in a museum, little one." And then she started painting again, right on the walls. She painted suns with sleepy eyes, children in oversized boots, stars that winked back at her. She painted over the designer's mural. When Theodore's assistant came to check in, she found Melanie on a ladder, her dress stained with orange and teal. "Should I call Mr. Langford?" the assistant asked. Melanie didn't look down. "Only if he plans to visit," she murmured, stroking a sunflower petal onto the ceiling. She hadn't seen him in 3 days. Meetings in Milan, calls in Zurich, an upcoming interview with a global finance network. His life was everywhere, except here. When he finally returned, it was past midnight. Melanie heard the door open from the nursery. She padded out, Belly leading the way, and found him in the kitchen, loosening his tie. "You're home," she said. He turned, surprised. "You're still up?" "I sleep when the baby lets me." He walked to the fridge, poured a glass of water. "Everything okay?" She studied his back. His broad, expensive, unbothered back. "The nursery's almost done," she said. "Good," he replied, without turning. She waited, but nothing else came. When he finally looked at her, she asked, "Do you want to feel the baby?" He paused, then stepped toward her, hand hovering awkwardly over her stomach. She guided his palm gently to the center. Nothing happened. He gave a small laugh. "Shy tonight?" Her expression didn't change. "He moves a lot when you're gone." He withdrew his hand. There was a silence between them that neither knew how to fix. "I'll be better," he said. But his phone buzzed 2 seconds later, and he answered it. The next day, Melanie canceled the floral consultant, canceled the custom diaper caddy, canceled the ridiculous newborn yoga instructor. She kept the paint, and her body, and the feeling that maybe motherhood would be a solo journey after all. That night, the baby kicked wildly while she was brushing her teeth. She doubled over laughing, hand cradling the round of her stomach. She whispered, "You're trying to remind me I'm not alone, aren't you?" The baby kicked again. She leaned against the wall, blinking back tears. "I see you," she said softly, "even if he doesn't." The rain came early that week, soft at first, then heavy. It matched the tension in the house, quiet, persistent, flooding in places unseen. Theodore had cleared his schedule for the weekend. At least that's what he said. But being present in body isn't the same as being there. He stayed downstairs, on calls, in meetings, working from the sleek corner desk in the library that he'd once promised would stay closed on weekends. Melanie watched him through the staircase rails, headset on, sleeves rolled, a man buried in numbers while life was blooming upstairs. She sat alone in the nursery again, now fully painted in her colors, not his. One hand rested on her belly. The other held a brush she couldn't seem to lift. She'd been meaning to finish one more mural, just above the crib, a mother and child. But every time she started, her fingers froze. Not because she lacked inspiration, but because she wasn't sure how to paint something she hadn't felt. By Saturday night, she couldn't hold it in anymore. He came upstairs carrying his laptop and a mug. He set them on the nightstand, already beginning a new task. Melanie sat on the edge of the bed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel invisible." He paused, looked at her, blinked. "You're tired," he said. "You've been working so hard on the room, the baby." "I'm not tired." He tilted his head, trying to be gentle. "Then what is it?" I said, "I feel invisible." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Mel, you're pregnant. Your hormones are—" "Stop." Her voice cut the room in half. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Blame the life inside me for how you refuse to show up." His mouth opened, closed. She stood, arms shaking. "I don't need a palace. I don't need imported strollers or scented towels or gold-trimmed bathrobes. I need you," she said, voice breaking. "I need you to look at me and see more than a checklist. He stepped closer. I do see you. No, Theodore. You see results, you see outcomes, you see risk. But you don't see me. He reached for her hand. She pulled away. And then he said it, low, tired, meant to calm her. It's just the hormones talking, Mel. Don't be dramatic. The room fell to pieces. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She just stared at him, eyes wide, shoulders still, as if something inside her had just quit. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, flat. That word, that one word just told me everything. Melanie, she raised a hand, palm out. I need space. He stepped back instinctively, guilt seeping into his expression. I didn't mean it like, I know exactly how you meant it. She walked to the bathroom, closed the door gently. He heard the lock click, and then silence. That night, she didn't sleep beside him. She slept on the nursery floor, wrapped in a soft cotton blanket, hand on her belly, the mural unfinished, her baby still kicking, as if reminding her, you're not crazy, you're not dramatic, you're just honest. It began with pressure, not sharp at first, just a tightening low in her belly, like a fist curling slowly inside her. Melanie shifted in bed, thinking it was a Braxton Hicks. Normal, harmless. But then came the second wave. Harder, deeper, more pointed. She sat up, one hand bracing the mattress, the other pressed against her stomach. Her skin felt cold despite the warmth of the room. Her breath shortened. Then came a sharp cramp, and a warm rush of fluid between her legs. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed and froze. The carpet beneath her feet was wet. Not sweat, not spilled water. It was her. Her waters had broken, but she was only 35 weeks along. Her heartbeat spiked. She tried to stand but wobbled, gripping the door frame to steady herself. Theodore, she called, her voice tight, body shaking. No answer. He wasn't in bed. She limped down the hallway, one hand on her belly, the other dragging along the wall. Theodore. She tried again, louder. He was in his study, dim light spilling beneath the door. She pushed it open without knocking. He sat at his desk, face lit by a screen, deep in a spreadsheet. He looked up, mildly irritated. Mel, it's almost 2. She leaned against the doorframe, wet and breathless. The baby. Something's happening. He stood, startled now. It's too early. I know, she gasped. But something's wrong. He moved toward her but stopped halfway. Have you called the doctor? No. I need you. He rubbed his face. Melanie, call the car, please. I have that pitch deck in 4 hours. I need some sleep. Her face fell. Her lips trembled. Theodore, she whispered. Another contraction hit, and she bent forward, crying out. He reached for her wrist. Okay, just breathe. It might be false labor. Don't panic. Don't say that, she hissed, tears brimming. This isn't panic. This is pain. Then he said it. Calm, detached, meant to comfort but fatal in its weight. You're just being dramatic. Melanie stared at him, not angry, not pleading, just empty. She pulled her hand from his grip, turned around and walked out of the room. He didn't follow. Not then. Not ever. She drove herself, keys trembling in her hands. One arm wrapped around her belly, the other clutched the steering wheel. Every red light felt like betrayal. Every pothole sent shock through her spine. Tears streamed down her face, not loud, not messy, just quiet sobs between contractions. The road blurred. By the time she reached the hospital, her vision was swimming, and her thighs were slick with blood. A nurse met her at the emergency bay, shouting for a gurney. We've got fluid loss. She's 35 weeks. Call OB now. Melanie didn't answer the questions. She just gripped the nurse's arm and said, Save him, please. Then darkness took her. Melanie woke up to fluorescent light cutting across her eyelids. The pain was gone. But something else, something colder, settled in its place. A dull ache between her legs. An emptiness that pulsed deeper than skin. She turned her head slowly. A nurse stood beside the monitor, adjusting a dial. When she noticed Melanie stirring, she approached with a soft voice. You're awake. That's good. Melanie blinked. Her throat was dry. Her lips cracked. "My baby?" she rasped. The nurse hesitated, a second too long. Melanie sat up despite the 4 in her arm and the weight in her bones. "My baby?" she asked again, louder. The nurse took her hand. "I'm so sorry." The room tilted, not in motion, but in silence. Everything inside Melanie crumbled without noise. Not a scream, not a sob, just the slow descent of understanding. Her hands floated to her belly. Still, hollow. He was born with a cord around his neck. The nurse continued gently. We tried everything." Melanie turned her face away. "I should have gotten here sooner," she whispered. "It wasn't your fault," the nurse said. But Melanie wasn't listening. She was remembering every red light, every bump in the road, every second she was bleeding, driving, alone, and all she could think was, 10 minutes. The nurse stayed a while, offered water, comfort. Melanie asked for none of it. "Do you want someone to call the father?" the nurse finally asked. Melanie stared at the wall. "No," the nurse hesitated. "He hasn't called. I know. Would you like to hold your son?" Melanie blinked. The nurse waited. Melanie shook her head, then paused. "No, I don't want to hold him. I understand. I want to paint him." They brought her a canvas, brushes, acrylics. No one asked why. They just gave her the tools. She was still bleeding, still weak, but she sat up in that bed, legs dangling, forward trailing, and began to paint with shaking fingers. Blue first, then gray, then the soft outline of a small boy, floating. Not lifeless, just drifting, like he was on his way to another place, untouched by the world. The nurse watched from the door, hands pressed over her heart. Melanie didn't cry. She just painted. Theodore arrived at dawn, still in a pressed shirt. No flowers, no teddy bear, no panic. Just a man who realized too late what silence costs. He walked into the room and froze. Melanie was covered in paint, on her hands, her gown, her thighs. Her eyes were distant. Her lips were parted, but not in greeting. He stepped closer. She didn't look at him. "Mel?" She didn't move. He reached out, just to touch her hand. She pulled it away without a word. He swallowed hard. "I came as soon as I—" She turned, slowly, eyes like wet glass. "Go home. But You already left," she said, voice flat. Not angry, just gone. The nurse returned with a fresh bandage. Melanie didn't speak. Theodore stood there for another 30 seconds, then turned around and walked out. Back in the hallway, he braced a hand against the wall. His throat clenched, but no one could hear a broken man when the woman had already shattered first. And Melanie? She kept painting, not for art, but for survival. The funeral took place 5 days later. No announcements, no press, no Langford family photographers, just fog, wind, and an unmarked plot on the outskirts of a forgotten field. Melanie refused the marble headstone Theodore tried to arrange. She refused the limousine, the black umbrella, the words read by strangers in tailored suits. She buried her son where the grass grew untamed, just outside the old cottage she once rented as a student before money found its way into her life. "I won't let the world define him," she said softly as the soil fell over the small box. No name carved, no date etched, only a hand-painted plaque driven into the earth, indigo and gray swirled together, a single brushstroke down the center. A life unfinished, but real. Theodore stood several paces back, hands clenched at his sides. He wore black, not out of tradition but shame. He'd offered everything: a trust fund, a crypt beside the Langford patriarchs, a scholarship foundation in the child's name. Melanie declined all of it. He had tried to fix it the only way he knew how, with legacy, with wealth, with noise. But grief doesn't accept checks, and silence doesn't barter. After the burial, Melanie walked alone down the path back to the cottage. She didn't wait for him, didn't look over her shoulder, didn't speak. When he finally caught up to her, she stopped only long enough to say, "Don't follow me." "I just want to talk," he said gently. She turned. Her face was calm, but her voice carried finality. "You talked when I was bleeding," she said, "but it wasn't to me. It was to your excuses. His mouth opened, but no words arrived. She stepped closer. Do you want to know what I remember the most about that night? He didn't answer. I remember the silence between contractions, and knowing, if I died, no one would be there to hold my hand. Back at the cottage, she changed into a linen nightdress. No makeup, no shoes, no mask. Just herself, raw, stripped of illusions, a mother with no child and too many memories. She stood in front of the same canvas she'd been painting before the baby came early. This time, she added shadows, not to hide things, but to show where light had failed. Later that evening, a soft knock echoed through the cottage. Melanie didn't answer, but the door creaked open anyway. Theodore stepped inside, rain on his shoulders, apology in his eyes. He saw her standing at the easel, barefoot, brush in hand. He didn't speak, just watched. Her cheeks were streaked with paint, and tears, and stubbornness. I loved him, she said without turning. I know, he whispered. No, you don't. Her voice cracked. Because if you did, you would have driven me. A long silence passed. Then came his confession. I wasn't scared of losing him. She slowly turned. He looked wrecked, eyes red, voice small. I was scared of losing you. Melanie stared at him, not moved, not softened, just processing. Then, quietly, you already did. Melanie didn't scream. She didn't burn his suits or smash vases or flood the internet with sorrow. Instead, she picked up a brush. That same night, while Theodore sat outside on the porch of the cottage, drenched and silent, she painted. Not to create beauty, not to move anyone, but because her body was full of ache and her mouth had no more words. The canvas stood taller than her. She faced it barefoot, in a gown streaked with rain and old paint and hospital discharge. Her hair was still damp, her thighs still sore, but her hands had found purpose again. The first stroke was black, not because she was mourning, but because it was the only color her fingers could hold without shaking. Then came red, not vibrant, but dull and heavy, like rusted blood. She painted in circles, not figures, not shapes, just movement, motion that didn't require explanation. Theodore watched from the open window. He said nothing. Every time he stepped forward, she painted faster. So he stayed where he was, afraid to interrupt what grief had finally taught her to say. She painted until her fingers blistered, until her wrist ached, until her knees buckled and she sat on the cold wooden floor, pressing her forehead against the canvas, breath hitching but never quite releasing into sobs. The house was quiet, except for her brush dragging across fabric and the occasional thunder from skies that didn't care who lived or died. She didn't let him inside. Not that night, but he never left the porch. By morning, he was still there, shoes soaked, eyes open, face hollow. When she emerged, hair tied back, eyes rimmed red, she didn't speak to him. She only carried the canvas to the shed out back and leaned it against the wall. Then she sat on the grass, legs folded, hands raw. He approached slowly, kneeling beside her like a man asking for grace. I'm sorry. She didn't respond. I should have been there. Still, no reply. He reached for her hand. This time, she let him touch it. The skin between their fingers was cold, but the grip was real. Melanie stared straight ahead, her voice flat. I lost our son while holding a steering wheel with blood in my lap. He closed his eyes. I know. You don't know. She turned to him slowly, her gaze unflinching. You'll never know. Theodore looked down. When he spoke again, it was barely audible. I deserve your silence. I deserve your absence, but I don't want either. Melanie studied him, not with bitterness, with exhaustion. You think this is about forgiveness? I don't know what it's about. It's about seeing. Her voice trembled. You say you want to show up, then see me. See what's left. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissed each knuckle slowly, then pressed his forehead to her palm. I see you. She didn't pull away, but she didn't soften either. Then don't say sorry. Show me. He nodded, not with promises, but with understanding, the kind that isn't spoken, only earned. Has grief ever made you create something you couldn't speak aloud? Tell us in the comments, and if this chapter moved you, help it reach someone who's healing too. Click like, subscribe, be part of this family. The day of the funeral, the sky didn't mourn. No dramatic thunder, no wind slicing through trees. Just a stillness so heavy, it felt like the air itself had paused out of respect. Melanie arrived alone. No black dress, no veil, just her linen gown, her bare arms, and a folded canvas clutched tight to her chest. The field was quiet. The grave was small, and the earth, damp from the early morning dew, gave way without resistance. The burial was brief. No clergy, no speeches, no gilded frames or ceremonial platitudes. Just the caretaker, standing respectfully off to the side, and Melanie kneeling beside the opening in the ground. She placed the canvas gently on top of the box. A swirl of color, not blue, not gray, but a soft, smoky violet. In the center, a boy's silhouette held a brush in one hand and nothing in the other. A life never filled, a story never started. A goodbye whispered in strokes instead of sound. Theodore arrived just after she stood. He kept his distance, suit pressed, shoes polished, pain sitting squarely on his shoulders. He didn't interrupt her moment, didn't approach until she nodded, one brief signal that she was done placing her son to rest. "I wanted marble," he said softly. "I wanted time," she replied. They stood in silence. He looked down at the canvas. "She looks like you," he murmured, mistakenly referring to the figure in the painting. Melanie's lips parted. "That's him." He froze. Her voice didn't waver. "I painted him the way I imagined he'd look at 5. A long pause passed between them. Then she said, "You can go now." He nodded, accepting the weight of her sentence like a verdict. But as he turned to leave, she stopped him. "You don't get to grieve him like I do," she said. "Not because you don't love him, but because you didn't show up when it counted." He turned around, eyes glassy. "I know. Do you?" "I wasn't ready." Melanie clenched her jaw. "I was bleeding, Theodore. Ready or not, I needed you." He stepped forward. "I know I failed you. I know it doesn't fix anything. But I'm still here." She stared at him. "I don't need you to be here." "I'm not here for you," he said. "I'm here for him. Even if he's gone. Even if I'm late. I'm still showing up." Melanie's throat tightened. For the first time, she didn't have a reply. Because it wasn't a gesture. It was a truth. One spoken too late, but spoken nonetheless. She walked back to the cottage without looking back. He didn't follow. He sat by the grave instead, cross-legged, silent, and stripped of every version of himself that once believed he could fix things with plans. When the caretaker offered him a chair, he shook his head. When asked if he wanted help leaving, he declined. He stayed until the sun dipped low, until his shadow stretched across the painted plaque like a father's hand reaching for something he would never hold. Back at the cottage, Melanie lit a candle and sat in her son's unfinished nursery. She didn't cry. She whispered, "I hope you knew I wanted you, every moment." And then she laid down on the rocker and closed her eyes. A childless mother, a mother still. The first box arrived 3 days later. A soft knock on the door. No card, no driver in sight. Just a signature gold box with the unmistakable insignia embossed on the lid. Inside, a Cartier bracelet. White gold, diamond trimmed, delicate, useless. Melanie didn't even take it out of the box. She closed the lid, placed it gently on the kitchen counter, and went back to her brush. The second came the next morning. A velvet case with a necklace she recognized from a magazine. One featured on a celebrity at Cannes. The tag still clung to the clasp. She threw that one directly into the fireplace. Didn't flinch as it caught flame. Didn't blink as it turned to smoke. The third package contained something smaller. A key to a flat in Paris, along with a note for when you need to disappear but don't want to vanish alone. She stared at it for a long time, then tucked it in the drawer. Not because she forgave him, but because she wasn't ready to forget. Theodore kept sending things. Silk robes, rare books, custom oils for her paints, but Melanie never responded. Not with thanks, not with rage, just silence. It wasn't punishment. It was distance, space she needed to breathe, to remember what her voice sounded like when it wasn't trembling, to touch her stomach without the ache returning like an echo. One morning, a letter slipped under her door. No logo, no wax seal, just handwriting she'd recognize in the dark. "Melanie, I know gifts won't fix what I shattered, but I'm still here, still trying, Still learning how to love you the way you've always deserved. If silence is what you need, I'll honor it. But if you ever find space for me again, I'll be standing at the edge of it, with empty hands and a heart that finally understands weight. She folded it, placed it under the jar of brushes on her desk. That afternoon, she opened the studio windows. For the first time in weeks, let the wind in. Let the grief move. Not out, but through. When her neighbor brought over soup and found Melanie barefoot, brush in hand, paint smudged across her cheeks like war paint, she asked gently, "Are you all right?" Melanie didn't say yes, but she smiled. A small, cracked, honest smile. That was enough. Later that night, she found the last box Theodore had sent. Still unopened, still pristine. She carried it to the fireplace like the others, but this time, she paused, lifted the lid. Inside, a single photograph of the canvas she'd left at the grave, professionally preserved, framed in reclaimed oak. No note, no branding, just her art, seen, respected, returned. She didn't burn it. She hung it above her bed and whispered, "Thank you." Melanie didn't expect him that evening. She had just finished her second painting of the day, something abstract, something fierce. The studio floor was splattered with hues of rust and gold. Her nightdress clung to her paint-streaked skin. Barefoot, she stepped over old canvases, a mug of cold tea in her hand. The porch creaked. She turned. There he was. Theodore stood at the threshold like a man rehearsing apologies. No flowers, no coat, no script, just a breath caught in his chest and a softness in his eyes she hadn't seen since the early days. He waited, didn't speak, didn't move. Melanie didn't invite him in. She turned back to her easel. If he wanted to be there, he'd have to enter the world she created, not the one he bought. After a long pause, he stepped in, slowly, quietly, like he understood that this space was no longer his to command. He scanned the room, its wild disorder, its beauty, its scars. She was bent over a canvas again, focused. She didn't acknowledge him. Not yet. He watched her in silence for minutes that felt like confessions. The way her shoulders tensed when the brush scraped, the way her jaw locked when she stepped back to evaluate her work. He remembered that stance. He remembered that silence. He remembered everything he ignored when it mattered most. Finally, her voice cut through the room. "I loved him." Theodore swallowed hard. "I know." "No, you don't." She didn't turn. She dipped her brush in violet. "You never rubbed my belly. You never talked to him. You never touched me like I was carrying your blood." He took a shaky step forward. "I didn't know how. Loving someone isn't a skill you learn," she said. "It's a choice you show. And you didn't." Now she turned, face streaked with dried color and quiet fury. "I carried your son. I bled for him, and I buried him while you adjusted your collar and checked your calendar." Theodore didn't interrupt. He couldn't. She set the brush down. Her eyes burned, not with tears, but with clarity. "I don't need an apology. I didn't come to give one," he said quietly. "I came to listen, even if it wrecks me." A long silence stretched between them. Then she walked toward him, slow and deliberate, stopped inches away. "You once told me I changed your world." "I remember," he whispered. She placed her palm on his chest. "I need you to prove that I still do." He nodded once, eyes glossy, voice low. "Then teach me." She exhaled, then turned away, back to the canvas. She dipped her brush in gold this time. "I'll teach you in silence," she said, "with rules, with space, with hours you can't buy back." "I'll take everyone," he replied. He didn't try to touch her again. He simply pulled up a stool and sat, watched her work, watched her live, watched her become. And this time, he didn't speak, because finally, he understood. Some pain doesn't want to be fixed. It wants to be witnessed. The next morning, Melanie found him asleep in the chair. Shoes off, neck tilted uncomfortably, arms folded across his chest like a man trying to hold himself together. She didn't wake him. She just stood there for a moment, staring at the man who once missed the most important night of their lives, and who now seemed afraid to blink in case he missed another. When he stirred, his eyes landed on her. No panic, no rehearsed smile, just quiet awareness. "I didn't mean to fall asleep," he said, voice thick. "I know." She walked past him and set 2 mugs on the table, black coffee for him, cinnamon tea for her. A small act, not forgiveness, but something close to allowance. They sat in the cottage kitchen, bare feet brushing under the table. The silence was easier now, not because it was healed, but because it was honest. Theodore took a breath, as if preparing for a speech. Melanie cut him off before he could begin. "No rehearsals," she said without looking up. He nodded, swallowing whatever monologue he'd been building in his chest. Then, after a moment, "I wasn't scared of losing him." She lifted her eyes. "I was scared of losing you." He didn't say it like an excuse. He said it like a truth he'd been too ashamed to voice. "I didn't know how to hold your pain," he continued. "So I avoided it. Hid behind work, behind plans, behind practicality." She said nothing. He kept going. "I thought if I just kept moving, I wouldn't feel it. That if I built you the perfect nursery, you'd see that as love." Melanie set her cup down. "What I needed," she said softly, "was your presence. Not your projects." He nodded. "I know that now." She stood and walked to the window. Outside, the field swayed in soft morning light. She wrapped her arms around herself and whispered, "You didn't just miss his life, Theo. You missed mine too." He rose from the table, walked to stand behind her, but didn't touch her. "I see that now," he said. She turned. Her voice was steady. "I begged you," I screamed without raising my voice. "I was drowning beside you, and you were checking emails." He closed his eyes. "I know, and I live with that moment every day." She studied him, then, after a pause, asked, "Why did you really come back?" He opened his eyes, met hers with a rawness she hadn't seen before. "Because I was afraid I'd forget the sound of your voice." She blinked. "Because I still see your red dress in my sleep." He took a breath. "Because I want to learn how to stay, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it hurts, especially then." Melanie didn't reply. She just looked at him. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't see the man who left. She saw the man who was trying, late, imperfect, but trying. "You can stay for now," she said quietly. His chest rose like he'd been underwater. "But there are no guarantees." "I don't want guarantees," he replied. "Just chances." She gave a faint nod. "Then start by sitting beside me." They returned to the studio. She pulled out a blank canvas. He sat beside her, didn't touch her brush, didn't ask questions, just watched her paint in silence. And in that stillness, without ceremony, a new kind of intimacy was born, not built on sex, not built on vows, but on witness. It began with a brushstroke, not on canvas, but on him. Melanie dipped her fingers in ochre and dragged them slowly down the center of Theodore's chest. He didn't flinch, didn't ask why. He just let her. They stood in the studio, the light dim, the evening air brushing softly through the open window. She circled him, barefoot, paint on her hands, fire in her silence. Each stroke she made on his skin was deliberate, not random, not decorative, a reclaiming. She ran blue down the inside of his arm, a band of violet across his shoulder, a line of gold beneath his ribs. He remained still, like a man being documented, remembered, punished, honored, all at once. "You never let me touch you," she said finally. "I didn't know how, and now, I want you to show me." She stepped in close, chest to chest. No barriers, no plans, only breath, only heat. She looked up at him. "Don't speak." He nodded. Then she kissed him, not softly, not sweetly, but with grief and ache and possession. Her mouth found his jaw, his throat, his collarbone. She stripped him of the rest of his clothes like she was peeling off history. They didn't make love like before. There was nothing tender about the beginning. She pushed him back onto the canvas-covered floor, climbed onto him, pressed her palms against his chest, paint smearing under her fingers. "This doesn't mean I forgive you," she whispered. "I know. This isn't love. I'm not asking for that." She moved her hips slowly, deliberately, her thighs trembling against his. "This is what's left," she said, "after everything," and he let her take it. She rode him like a woman chasing silence. Not release, not fantasy, but stillness. Her hands on his chest, her breath ragged, her body finding a rhythm that felt like memory breaking into movement. He gripped her hips, not to control, but to anchor. His eyes stayed open. not in desire, but reverence, as if she were holy, as if her pain was scripture. When she climaxed, it wasn't soft. It was jagged. A gasp, a sob, a body collapsing over his. He didn't move, just held her. Paint smeared across both of them now, red and gold on their skin, grief and sweat, and something unnamed in the air. They didn't speak for a long time. She lay across him, ear over his heart, listening. He stroked her back once, then again, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed, but did it anyway. "This didn't fix anything," she whispered eventually. "I know. But I needed it." "I did too." She sat up. Paint streaked her thighs, her arms, her neck. He reached up and touched her face, wiped away a smudge of blue near her mouth. "You're still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he said quietly. Her lips twitched. Not a smile, but not a rejection either. She leaned down and kissed his temple, then stood. She picked up the brush again, returned to the easel. Still naked, still breathing hard, still bleeding, but this time into color. Theodore watched her from the floor, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel powerful. He felt present. It was supposed to be a routine follow-up, a standard check. Melanie sat in the clinic, legs dangling off the side of the examination table, cold paper rustling beneath her as she waited for the doctor to return. She hated this room, hated the smell of antiseptic and hope. The silence was too familiar, the lighting too honest, and her body still too fragile. The door opened. Dr. Hassan entered with the same soft eyes she had the night Melanie lost the baby. But this time, there was no emergency, just a clipboard and a pause. Melanie already knew. The doctor sat across from her, hands folded, voice gentle. "There's scarring, more than we anticipated." Melanie nodded once. "Some of it's functional," the doctor continued, "but a significant portion is structural. The trauma from delivery, it caused long-term damage." Another nod. "Melanie, I'm so sorry. You may not be able to carry again. Not, can't, but close enough." Melanie stared at the floor, then at the corner of the table, then nowhere at all. She didn't cry. Not yet. She just breathed. Short, controlled, like she was bracing for something that had already hit. Theodore drove her home. He didn't ask what the doctor said. He knew better. Melanie sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her wedding ring twisted under her thumb. She hadn't taken it off, not once. But today, she noticed how heavy it felt. At the cottage, she didn't go inside. She stood in the doorway, motionless. Theodore waited behind her, then finally asked, "What did she say?" Melanie answered without turning, "I can't carry again." The words dropped between them like weight on thin ice. "I'm so sorry," he said. She let out a breath. "You don't have to be." "I do." She finally turned to face him. "No, you don't." She stepped inside and walked straight to the nursery, the one she never finished. The sun had faded the colors on the walls. One of the painted stars was beginning to peel. She sat in the center of the room, legs folded, palms resting on her thighs. "I'm not broken," she said aloud, to no one. To the room, to herself, to God. Later, Theodore found her still sitting there. He crouched beside her. Not too close, just near enough. "You can hate me if you need to," he said. "I don't hate you. I don't." She looked at him, eyes clear, voice steady. "I just don't want to keep being reminded of everything I couldn't keep alive." He reached for her hand, held it softly. "You didn't lose him," he whispered. The world just wasn't ready to hold him. Melanie blinked hard, but the tears didn't fall. Not yet. She looked down. "I won't be giving you a family." Theodore's reply came without hesitation. "I never wanted children." She looked up sharply. He held her gaze. "I wanted you. Children were just echoes of what we built. But you were always the beginning." She closed her eyes. Let the silence settle again. This time, it didn't hurt. It just stayed. Close, like something she could finally touch without breaking. Theodore sat at the edge of the bed that night, staring at the floor. Melanie was silent beside him, curled beneath the blanket, eyes open but unfocused. Neither of them slept. Too much had been said. Too much hadn't. Finally, he spoke. "When I was a boy, my mother miscarried 3 times. Melanie turned slightly, not expecting that. She never spoke of them, he continued. But she wore black every year on the same dates. She said nothing, just cooked less, smiled less, laughed, never. Melanie waited. He wasn't finished. She used to tell me I was the one who made it, he said. Like I had to be enough for all the ones who didn't. He looked at her. I didn't know what that meant. Not until now. Melanie sat up slowly, the blanket falling into her lap. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I thought I had to be the strong one. She scoffed softly. Strength isn't the same as silence. He nodded. I know that now. There was a long pause before he added, I used to imagine I'd be a terrible father. Why? Because I never had an example I wanted to follow. He looked down at his hands. I was afraid I'd repeat it, the coldness, the detachment, the way she smiled at guests and closed doors on her son. Melanie swallowed. That's not who you are. It's who I became. She shook her head gently. No, it's who you were. You came back, Theo. That counts for something. He shifted toward her. His voice softened. When we lost the baby, I didn't just lose a future. I lost the one chance I thought I had to rewrite history. Melanie whispered, You still can. He frowned. How? By showing up now. He touched her hand. Would you ever try again? I don't mean carrying. I mean parenting. Yes. She looked down at their joined hands. I don't know yet. That's fair. She paused, then asked, Would you still want that? Knowing he or she wouldn't be yours by blood? Theodore didn't hesitate. I've spent my life obsessed with legacy, but I think I understand now. Legacy isn't DNA. It's presence. Melanie's eyes welled. She blinked the tears away, then quietly said, That's the first thing you've ever said that made me want to try again. He smiled. Not wide, but real. She leaned into his chest, resting her ear above his heart. It beat steady, anchoring her, reminding her that even after everything, there was still rhythm, still breath, still them. They didn't speak again that night, not because there was nothing left to say, but because for once, the silence between them didn't hurt. It held them. Melanie hadn't painted in days, not because she couldn't, but because the silence in the studio no longer asked her to. The walls weren't empty, they just weren't ready, and neither was she. She dusted the windowsills, rearranged her paints, organized brushes by bristle type, but the canvases stayed untouched until she found it. It was tucked beneath the easel, folded neatly, paper thick, weighted, and unmistakably familiar. The handwriting stopped her heart for a second. Theodore's. She hesitated before opening it, then unfolded it slowly, careful not to crease the corners. If you ever decide to paint again, I want your first canvas to be me. All of me. T. Melanie stood still, letter in hand, breath lodged somewhere deep in her chest. She looked at the easel, at the blank canvas that had waited in the corner for weeks, then at the table, at the gold paint she hadn't touched since the night she rode grief out of her body onto Theodore's chest. That night, after dinner, she didn't say a word, just pulled the canvas into the center of the room, set out her palette, dipped her brush, and called out softly, Take your clothes off. He appeared in the doorway, surprised. She didn't repeat herself. He stepped into the light. No hesitation this time. He unbuttoned his shirt, dropped his pants, removed everything until nothing was left but bare skin and the shadows cast by a single bulb overhead. He stood still, not posing, not preening, just ready. She didn't speak as she worked. She used long strokes, beginning at the shoulders, gold across his collarbone, blue down his ribcage, crimson over the bend of his hip, every color chosen not for contrast, but for meaning. She remembered what he looked like when he was distracted, when he was cruel, when he was absent. But now, she studied him as he was, present, open, silent. He didn't flinch as she brushed a line of violet across the inside of his thigh, didn't move when she painted just above his heart, didn't speak when she kissed the spot she'd painted last, only inhaled sharply when she whispered, You're not a canvas, you're the frame. She set the brush down, climbed onto his lap. He was already hard, but she didn't rush. She held his face between her hands and said, Don't touch me. He nodded. She straddled him, slow, heavy, her breath hitching as he entered her. This wasn't possession. It was permission. She moved like someone learning the shape of a scar. He let her. No commands. No noise. Just hands open beside him, back resting against the wall, his eyes locked on hers like she was the only form of truth he had ever believed in. When she came, it was silent. Tears streamed down her cheeks as her body released everything she'd carried for too long. When he followed, his lips found her shoulder, not in pleasure, but in prayer. They stayed like that for minutes, maybe hours. Skin slick, paint smeared, chest to chest. Then she slid off him, picked up the brush again, and outlined the shape they had made together, one stroke at a time. She didn't title it, but when she was done, she signed it. For the first time in years. Theodore stood slowly, eyes on the painting, then on her. "Can I keep it?" "No," she said. "I understand." She smiled faintly. "You don't need to keep it." He tilted his head. "Because I painted you into me already." Theodore had never felt nervous undressing for anyone, not even in his 20s, when confidence had been ego disguised as charm. But now, in Melanie's studio, her gaze stripped more than clothing. It peeled him open, made him honest, made him hers. She pressed his shoulders against the cool wall again, the dim golden light throwing soft shadows across his chest. Her voice was velvet. "I'm not done painting you," she said, brushing her fingers across his skin. "But you already finished the canvas," he replied. "That was for them," she whispered. "This one's for me." Melanie moved like music, deliberate, unhurried. She dipped her fingers into the gold paint, pressed them to his collarbone, then lower, across his chest, down the slope of his abdomen, trailing heat in every stroke. "Do you know what I see when I look at you now?" she asked, voice quiet but firm. He shook his head. She didn't wait for him to answer. "I see a man brave enough to return, to apologize, to stay." Her fingers slid across his sternum. "I see a man who broke something sacred." Her touch dipped just above his navel, and learned how to build it back. Theodore's breath caught as she reached for the brush. She dipped it again, this time in deep crimson. Then gently she painted over the gold she'd left on his chest. Not covering it, but layering. He understood. Scars don't disappear. They transform. He whispered, "Why red?" She looked up. "Because this part of you bled for me." He reached for her hand, but she pulled it back. "Not yet," she said. "This is my turn to explore." And explore she did. Every inch of his skin became canvas. Every touch a sentence. Every breath a chapter. And his eyes read every word. She knelt, brushing against him, not provocatively, but intentionally, claiming, honoring, worshipping. Her lips followed the trail of gold, down his chest, across his stomach, until he groaned, low, guttural, restrained. But she didn't stop, didn't speak, just let her mouth do what forgiveness couldn't. When she rose again, he was trembling, not from shame, but from reverence. He reached for her cheek. She let him touch her now, because he'd earned it. "You're shaking," she said softly. "I've never felt this seen," he replied. She stepped out of her robe, revealing her body, still soft from the miscarriage, still tender in places she'd stopped believing could be touched with love. But his gaze didn't falter. It deepened. "You're the most beautiful I've ever seen you," he said. She laughed quietly. "I'm heavier. You're real." He led her to the floor, because the bed felt too distant, too rehearsed. Here, with paint still wet between them, they found each other again. It wasn't fast. It wasn't wild. It wasn't driven by hunger. It was worship. He moved with intention. So did she. Each thrust a question. "Do I still matter?" Each moan a reply, more than ever. Her legs wrapped around his back, anchoring him. His mouth claimed her lips, her neck, her chest, places she had grieved for and feared would never feel wholly again. And when she cried this time, it wasn't from loss. It was from rediscovery. She wasn't just a wife again, or a lover. She was alive. Afterward, they lay tangled on the floor, gold streaked across their skin. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. But Melanie broke the silence with a breathless whisper. "I think I'm ready." Theodore looked at her. "For what?" She smiled softly. "To live again." The room didn't feel like a room anymore. It felt like a heartbeat. a single, pulsing echo of something sacred rediscovered. The canvas was drying behind them, but the real painting, the one being created now, was made of skin, breath, and trembling promises. Melanie straddled him, slow and certain, her body draped in nothing but the amber glow of the lamp. Theodore lay beneath her, chest rising in sync with hers, arms resting at his sides like an offering. He didn't guide. He didn't lead. He surrendered. Her palms pressed to his chest, fingertips slipping across where she had painted him in gold. The paint had smudged. She didn't care. "This," she whispered, lowering herself until she was seated fully. "On him, breath-catching, is who we were before the world got loud." He reached for her hips, but she caught his wrists and gently pressed them back down. "Let me," she breathed. She began to move. Rhythmic, slow, like waves reclaiming the shore. Her body undulated, hips rolling, thighs tightening, breath sinking. With his, until there was no telling where she ended, and he began. He groaned, low and quiet, not out of lust, but reverence. She leaned forward, lips brushing the shell of his ear. "You used to worship boardrooms," she whispered, her voice molten. "Now look where you kneel." He exhaled a laugh into her neck, hands fisting the linen underneath them, straining not to lose control. But he didn't fight it. Not tonight. Melanie moved like a memory. Her hair fell over her shoulders, brushing his jaw. Her thighs clenched around him, tighter with each glide. He kissed her sternum, then her breast, then her ribs, tracing her like she was an ancient script written only for him. Her hands framed his face now. "Look at me," she said, breathless but grounded. He opened his eyes. Locked into hers. What he saw there undid him. Not pleasure, not fire, but recognition. "This is who we were," she said again. A pause. Then quieter. "This is who we still are." His hands moved, finally, but not to control. He ran them up her back, slid them into her hair, held her as if she might disappear again. But she didn't. She arched, rode him deeper. Her lips parted in a gasp that wasn't loud but lingered like incense. Their bodies found a tempo all their own. No rhythm forced, no climax chased. Just being, just breath. Melanie's skin glowed with sweat, every movement painting new heat between them. Theodore tilted his head back, moaning her name, not like a question, but like an answer he'd waited years to say aloud. She leaned forward, lips just barely grazing his. This time, she whispered, "I won't let you walk away from what we've made." He surged up, mouth meeting hers, arms wrapping tight around her waist. She kept moving. He held on. Together, they climbed, not to escape, but to return. When she came, her entire body tensed in his arms, shuddering, sobbing, releasing. He followed seconds later, groaning into her neck, face buried against the curve where her shoulder met her collarbone, as if returning home to the safest place he knew. After, she collapsed against his chest, both of them panting, hearts drumming in the same frantic rhythm. He brushed a curl off her cheek. She kissed his jaw. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. Their bodies had said everything, and as they lay in the quiet, tangled in paint and sweat and absolution, she whispered against his skin, "Now let's make something that never breaks." Their bodies remained tangled, cooling under the weight of healing. The golden paint had transferred from skin to skin, creating a quiet constellation between them. Not perfect, but beautifully accidental. Like their love, Melanie lay on his chest, her fingers tracing the faint scar that ran beneath his left collarbone. Her voice broke the silence, not with need, but with knowing. "I don't think I can carry again." Theodore didn't flinch. He only nodded. "I know." She sat up slowly, tugging the linen around herself, not from shame, but from self-protection. Her eyes didn't leave his. "I needed to say it out loud. Not because I'm asking you to make peace with it, but because I finally have." Theodore sat up too, legs crossed, paint smudged across his chest and thighs. "You think I'm still wishing for a son," he said quietly. He looked down, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. "You always knew how to find the knot and untie it," she added softly. A pause. Then Theodore looked at her, really looked. "What if we didn't try to replace what we lost?" he asked. She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we gave love to a child already waiting for it?" Her lips parted. He continued, voice steady but tender. I don't need a mirror image. I don't need bloodlines. I need laughter in these halls again. Footsteps down the stairs. Crayons on your art table. A child who knows what love sounds like at breakfast. Tears welled in her eyes, not from grief this time, but from shock. She hadn't realized until that moment how much she needed to hear it. I thought you'd want someone to carry your name. I want someone to carry our love, he replied. Silence. Warm. Weighty. Then she whispered, there's a little girl I met through the foundation, 4 years old, loves sunflowers and strawberry jam. They say she never cries, not even at night. He nodded slowly. She sounds brave. She sounds familiar, Melanie said, voice breaking. They didn't say let's adopt her. They didn't sign anything. Not yet. But the decision was made, in the space between heartbeats. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. She won't replace what we lost. She's not supposed to, Melanie said. She's supposed to be found. They sat together like that for a while. Quiet. Bare. Complete. Then Theodore leaned forward, lips brushing her shoulder. Melanie turned, eyes glossy but glowing. He kissed her mouth, slow, reverent. Then, without words, he slid down her body. At first, she thought he was being playful again. But then he stopped at her stomach. The skin was soft, still healing, a place where dreams had once grown. He pressed his lips there, a kiss so gentle it felt like prayer, not to wish for new life, not to undo the past, but to honor it. She cupped the back of his head, running her fingers through his hair. What are you doing? She asked softly. Kissing the memory, he whispered. Because even if the world never saw them, I did. She closed her eyes. One tear, that's all. Then none. Because in that moment, she wasn't empty. She was sacred. He rose again, kissed her lips once more, then stood, still naked, still golden, still hers. Melanie smiled up at him. I think it's time we made this house feel like home again. He nodded. Tomorrow, he said. We open every curtain, we make pancakes and burn the first batch, we turn the music up, and we buy a yellow toothbrush, she added. For her? For us, Melanie said, because I think she'll come, and when she does, love will already be waiting at the door, paint smeared, battle-worn, and more alive than ever. The first night, she hummed in her sleep. Melanie sat on the edge of the small twin bed, her hand resting gently on the little girl's chest. The sound was soft, barely audible, but it was unmistakably music, not words, just a tune, as if her heart had memorized a lullaby that her lips didn't know how to sing. The girl's name was Amara, 4 years old, hair like sun-warmed wheat, eyes that held stillness instead of fear. She never cried, not when they met her, not when she was introduced to her new bedroom, not even when she was told she could call them Mum and Dad if she wanted to. But that night, after warm milk and a whispered goodnight, Melanie heard it. That melody. That hidden joy. She sings when she sleeps, Melanie whispered the next morning, curled into Theodore's arms. He kissed her forehead. Maybe that's the only time she feels safe. It wasn't long before the sound of humming became part of their rhythm. Each night, Amara would curl into her blankets and release the notes like smoke rising into the ceiling beams. Each morning, Melanie would watch her stretch in the sunlight, eyes bright, the unspoken tune still lingering in the corners of the room. She's not broken, Theodore said one afternoon, as they watched her balance strawberries on her fingers. She's careful. Melanie nodded, like someone who knows what it means to lose something they never got to keep. 3 months later, another child came. His name was Jasper. 7, mute by choice. He hadn't spoken since his last foster placement, the one that ended in too many slammed doors and unanswered questions. He arrived clutching a toy elephant and wearing boots 2 sizes too big. Theodore knelt down, extending his hand. You don't have to say anything, he said softly, but I'll listen anyway. Jasper didn't flinch, but he didn't run either. That night, Amara climbed into Jasper's bed without a word. Melanie watched from the hallway, breath held. Jasper didn't stop her. He just shifted slightly to make space. By morning, he was clutching 2 elephants, his own, and the stuffed one Theodore placed at his side during the night. A week later, Jasper spoke his first word. To the elephant. It was stay. By spring, the 3rd child arrived. Lena, a firecracker in denim overalls. 6 years old, bold as brass, and already twice as protective as any adult Melanie had ever met. She didn't walk into the house, she charged. "This place smells like cookies," she said on arrival, arms folded. Melanie laughed. "It usually does." "Well, it better always," Lena declared. "I don't like dry houses." Lena didn't hum. She danced. Through rooms, down hallways, even when no one was watching, and especially when Theodore played the piano. It was her who dragged Jasper into a waltz across the kitchen floor. It was her who taught Amara how to shout across the garden. It was her who gave Melanie a bracelet made of string and beads and declared, "You're my mum now, even if I have 10 more. You're the forever one." Each child brought something different. Amara brought stillness that soothed. Jasper brought silence that taught them how to listen. Lena brought storms that cleared the air. They didn't arrive to fill a void. They arrived to widen the walls of the home, to stretch it, to stretch them. Theodore stood in the doorway one evening, arms crossed as he watched the 3 children chase each other through the hallway. The paint on the walls was smudged with fingerprints. The once pristine rug had crayon marks. The grand piano had stickers all over the bench. "Looks like chaos," Melanie murmured, coming up behind him. He turned, kissed her cheek. "Looks like art." In the quiet that followed, Amara began to hum again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Jasper's voice joined hers, soft, barely more than breath. Lena clapped along off-key. It was messy, unpolished, and perfect. And in that chorus of bedtime noise, Theodore finally heard what silence had always hidden, the sound of a family choosing each other back. It began with a brushstroke. Melanie hadn't touched a canvas in over 2 years, not since the hospital, not since the blood, not since her hands began to tremble in the silence after delivery. But one quiet Tuesday morning, when Amara was humming over her cereal and Jasper was assembling towers of cereal boxes, she walked past the garage, paused, and opened the door. The light filtered in gently, like it had been waiting. Her old easel stood in the corner, shrouded beneath a dusted sheet like a sleeping ghost. She pulled it off. Beneath it lay colors still rich in their tubes. Brushes stiff but salvageable. Canvas blank. Heart ready. She didn't think. She moved. And for the first time since losing the baby, she didn't cry when her hands shook. She simply painted through them. The first painting was abstract. An ocean beneath a lavender sky. No humans. No names. Just layers. Of memory. Of grief. Of forgiveness. She signed it, Ma, and uploaded a photo of it anonymously to a digital gallery she used to browse years ago, before love and heartbreak changed her. She didn't expect anyone to notice, but someone did. 3 days later it sold. Then another. Then a gallery in Soho reached out to inquire if the artist known as Ma would consider submitting more pieces. They offered silence and respect. They didn't ask who she was. They asked only what else she had to say in color. Melanie said yes, but she kept it from the children. And from Theodore. Not out of shame, but because it was sacred, something hers, a way of speaking with the parts of her that still whispered in grief. She called it The Language of Ghosts, a series of 12 canvases, each born of memory, not of death, but of rebirth. Meanwhile, Theodore stared out of his boardroom window, wondering how the skyline had lost its meaning. He sat at the head of the long glass table, surrounded by suits, buzzwords, and projections. But all he could think about was Lena's knock-knock jokes, Amara's sleepy smiles, Jasper's proud, quiet nods when he learned something new. He missed it. He missed home. "Sir?" His assistant called. "They need your input on the fourth quarter projections." He blinked, then rose. "No," he said clearly. "They don't." He walked out. No press release. No applause. No fight. He simply left and never went back. He arrived home by lunchtime. Melanie was barefoot in the studio, paint on her fingers, music humming from her phone. He leaned against the doorway and just watched. She didn't see him at first, and when she did, she blinked in surprise. "You're home early." "I'm home," he replied. That was all. No more meetings, no more profit margins, just life. She walked toward him, brush still in hand. His shirt was still crisp, but his face had softened. "Was it time?" she asked. It was overdue. That night, they told the children, I'm going to be home more, Theodore said. More tickles? Lena asked. He nodded. More pancakes? Amara added. Another nod. Jasper only smiled. It was enough. Later, while the kids slept and the candles burned low in the living room, Melanie leaned into him. You chose us. I always would, he replied. She touched his cheek. I have something to show you tomorrow. He raised a brow. A surprise? A secret? His eyes lit up. I love secrets, especially the ones that come in colors. She kissed him then, soft, lingering, not just as his wife, but as a woman who had found herself again, in brushstrokes, in barefoot mornings, in the sound of silence being filled with purpose. And as she leaned against his chest, she whispered the title of her next painting. It would be called The Man Who Chose Home, and it would be her favorite one yet. The name came to him in the quiet. It wasn't during a speech, not while reviewing documents. It was one of those moments when the house hummed with softness, Amara snoring against Melanie's arm, Jasper, snuggled in with a half-finished comic book in his hand, Lena curled by Theodore's leg like a kitten. Melanie was asleep, head resting on his chest, their blanket a tangle of limbs and stories. And that's when he whispered it into the air. The Hearthline Foundation. The next morning, he told Melanie over coffee. She didn't speak right away, just pressed her hand to her lips, then nodded slowly. For them? She asked. For you, he said, and the others who never got to name what they lost. He didn't want it to be another building with cold marble floors. He wanted it to feel like a house, a soft landing, somewhere grief wasn't muted, somewhere women, mothers, could come and be held. They bought an old estate on the edge of town. Stone walls, overgrown ivy, windows that caught the sun just right. They refurbished it, not to erase its age, but to preserve the story in its bones. Melanie painted a mural in the foyer, not with brushes, with her hands. The Hearthline Foundation opened with no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no press, just doors that opened one Monday morning, and a sign on the path that read, You're not broken, you're breathing. That means there's still something beautiful waiting. The first visitors were hesitant. A woman who hadn't spoken her baby's name aloud in years. A husband who hadn't known how to grieve. A teenage girl who had lost her child in silence. They sat in the circle on the first day and cried, not because they were weak, but because someone finally let them. Melanie didn't give speeches. She gave brushes, and silence, and a wall where they could leave something behind. Color, memory, pain. It became known as the healing wall. Each mark a story, each color a scar transformed. Theodore taught one class a month. Not business, not finance. He taught presence. How to sit with someone who is hurting without trying to fix them. How to hold their hand when there's nothing else to say. He once ended a session with, You don't need the right words. You just need to stay. They didn't count success in numbers. They counted it in names spoken aloud, in tears wiped by strangers who became friends, in silence that no longer stung. Back home, their kids would sometimes ask why the paintings in Mommy's studio look different now. Because they're not just hers anymore, Theodore once said. They belong to every woman she's helped. On one rainy night, Melanie came home with clay under her nails, laughter still in. Her voice from a grief therapy session that had turned into a storytelling circle. She kissed the top of Lena's head, then Amara's cheek, then ruffled Jasper's curls. They all snuggled on the couch. Theodore turned off the TV. They listened to the storm outside. Inside, only peace. I used to think love had to be earned, Melanie whispered against his shoulder. He kissed her temple. And now? She smiled softly. Now I know. It just has to be shared. They all fell asleep like that. Not in bedrooms, but on one couch, beneath one roof, one love. The garden was quiet that morning. Sunlight filtered through the jasmine leaves, dappling Melanie's blanket with flecks of gold. She sat in the old wooden chair Theodore had carved decades earlier, her fingers resting on the armrest as if the wood remembered every season of their love. The house behind her breathed with history, paintings, laughter, stories, children. But the air now was still. Theodore lay on a rug at her feet, propped on one elbow, watching her with the same eyes he had on the day they met. Lines had deepened. Time had drawn its signature across their faces. But the softness between them? Unchanged. You're still here, she whispered, her voice papery. He smiled faintly. Always. Her hand reached for his, barely lifting, like a petal drifting down. He caught it with both of his, brought it to his lips, held it there. I painted something, she said, her breath short. Another mural? No, just one canvas, one color. He frowned gently. What color? Gray. He chuckled. That's not like you. It is now, she said. It was the only shade that could hold everything. She closed her eyes. Joy. Loss. You. He didn't correct her when she stopped speaking. Didn't ask her to hold on. Didn't beg. He just rested his forehead against the back of her hand and whispered, "Thank you." The birds kept singing. The wind brushed the roses. She slipped away like a sigh. He stayed there, forehead pressed to her fingers, not crying. There were no tears left, just memory and breath and silence that honored her. The front gate creaked later. Car doors, rushed footsteps. Dad? Jasper. Lena's voice followed. Where is she? Theodore didn't speak. He looked up, eyes soft. She's already gone. They froze. No wails, no collapse, just a stillness that filled the garden. Jasper knelt beside his father, resting a hand on his shoulder. She waited as long as she could. Theodore nodded. She held on just enough. For one last thank you. Lena kissed her mother's hand. Amara sat cross-legged on the grass, watching a butterfly land near Melanie's slipper. She loved these mornings, she whispered. She was these mornings, Theodore murmured. They didn't move her right away. They didn't call anyone. They sat there, together. In the garden she planted, among the roses she named after children she never bore but always loved. The final canvas rested upstairs. Gray, like she said, but not dull, not lifeless. It shimmered faintly when the sun caught it through the window, as if her soul had been folded inside the pigment. 2 days after Melanie's burial, the house was heavy with both silence and sunlight, the kind of quiet that made you believe she was still there, just in another room, just behind a closing door. Theodore hadn't gone upstairs since. Not to the studio, not to her sanctuary, but Amara did. She opened the door gently, as if interrupting would be rude. The air still smelled like paint, like oils and brush water, and a faint trace of her perfume. There were unfinished canvases everywhere, color swatches taped to the walls, sketches pinned above the windows like silent prayers. And in the center, on an easel draped with linen, sat one final work. She approached it slowly, hands trembling, heart too full, and when she pulled the cloth back, she gasped. A little boy stared back at her from the canvas, big eyes, curls the color of dusk. He held a blue marble in one palm and a dripping paintbrush in the other. His feet were bare. His shirt was smudged. His expression? Wonder, like he'd just discovered the world, and it was worth staying for. Jasper appeared in the doorway behind her. What is it? She stepped aside. Let him see. He froze, then whispered, That's the boy. What boy? The one she dreamed of. After the miscarriage, they all gathered. Theodore last. He stood before the canvas without saying a word. He didn't need to, because at the bottom corner of the painting, Melanie had written a title in her delicate script. You were always real. Theodore blinked back the sting in his eyes. She gave him a face. Lena nodded, hand over her mouth. She gave him a home. Amara stepped forward and touched the edge of the frame. You think she painted it recently? Theodore shook his head. No. She painted this the week after the hospital. I thought she stopped painting after. She did. But this was different. They turned the canvas around. Taped to the back was a letter, yellowed, folded once, still sealed. Amara hesitated, then broke the seal and began reading. To the child I never held, you never needed a heartbeat to be real. You lived in my colors, my dreams, my brush strokes. This world didn't hold space for you, but I did, and I will until my last breath. If anyone finds this, don't weep for what never was. He was, he is, and he always will be. Melanie. The room was still. No one moved. The air was sacred now, like church, like goodbye, like a woman who never stopped loving, even when the world told her to forget. Theodore reached out and pressed his thumb gently over the boy's heart on the painting. "I think," he said, voice thick, "we should hang this in the children's center." They all nodded. Unanimous. Unspoken. Right. Later that evening, the sun cast orange streaks across the hallway, and down the staircase laughter echoed, faint but pure, from the children they had raised, from the family they had built. But in the studio, there was only one sound, a soft creak from the easel, as if the boy had shifted, just a little, just enough to be seen. 1 year later, the skies over Wiltshire were streaked with lavender. A spring breeze stirred the grass as Theodore made his way along the stone path that wound through the memorial garden. His gait was slower now, but steady, purposeful. Behind him, 4 grown children followed, each with something in their hands. Not flowers, not candles, but sketchbooks and paints. At the edge of the garden stood a modest marble headstone, not grand, not polished to perfection, but honest. Carved into it were the words Theodore had insisted upon. Melanie Ruth Hawthorne, she turned pain into color and made us see. They set up their easels around her grave, one by one, silent, respectful, not out of grief, but reverence, because this had become their ritual. Every year, on the day she passed, they painted her, again, not how she looked when she died, but how she lived. Amara painted her laughing, a sunbeam across her cheek. Lena painted her kneeling in a garden, children around her like petals. Jasper painted her holding the boy with the blue marble. And Theo Jr., the baby they never had, but always carried, painted her eyes. Just her eyes. And Theodore? He didn't paint. Not anymore. His hands weren't as steady. His vision not as sharp. But he watched, and when the breeze picked up, he whispered, "She'd love this light." Theo Jr. set his brush down and came to sit beside his father. "Do you still talk to her?" Theodore smiled faintly. "Every morning." "What do you say?" "I tell her what I'm afraid of, what I'm proud of, and sometimes I just sit in silence." That was always her favorite sound anyway. Theo Jr. glanced toward the sky. "You think she's watching?" "No," Theodore said softly. "I think she's here." As the sun dipped low, they all stood and took a step back from their easels. 5 portraits, 5 different versions of one woman, all of them true, none of them enough, and still, somehow, complete. They didn't linger. They never did. They packed up slowly. Theodore knelt one last time, traced the edges of her name, and whispered something the others couldn't hear. But if they had listened closely, they would have caught it. Love bleeds, love breaks. But if you fight for it, it survives. As they walked away, the wind picked up. It rustled the leaves, moved across the field, and swirled around the stone. And in that soft current of air for just a moment, it smelled like turpentine and jasmine. Like her. Did this story shake your heart? Drop a love emoji in the comments if you've ever loved someone imperfectly and survived. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our family to part of us so you won't miss any of these heartful stories I share to you. And if Melanie and Theodore's story meant something to you, let the world know, save it, and hold your people close.